Over at DC Comics, the publisher has been doing a great job lately with fostering some of the new superheroes of the DC universe. And I think this idea is capitalized incredibly well in DC's We Are Legends publishing initiative. And of all the heroes making up this line, I think one of the most fascinating is Cameron Kim, City Boy. City Boy is a really interesting kind of loner character who is able to find hidden objects in cities that allow him to barely scrape by. My name is Arako Braddock, and today let's go ahead and dive into City Boy #1 over from DC Comics. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to go ahead and encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button if you enjoy our content. And I want to go ahead and kick our review of the issue off by introducing DC Comics' solicitation text behind City Boy #1. First seen in the Wildstorm 30th Anniversary Special and Lazarus Planet Legends Reborn, there's a new Korean hero named City Boy, or at least that's the best translation of what the cities call him. City Boy, also known as Cameron Kim, is just trying to make a living by using his powers of being able to speak to cities to find lost and hidden goods to pawn. And it's only just enough to get by. And those abilities mean he hears everything everywhere all the time, including each city's histories and the truths behind them. It's very loud in his head, and something he has to live with. As his powers get stronger, the cities start forming animal avatars from scraps in order to physically travel alongside him on his adventures. Of course, Gotham is a rat avatar made of scraps. But what about Blüdhaven, Metropolis, Amnesty Bay, or even Themyscira? And not all cities are so kind. Want to go ahead and introduce the creative team behind City Boy #1. This issue is written by Greg Pak, featuring art from Minkyu Jung, colors from Sunny Gho, and letters from Wes Abbott. The cover of the issue is also illustrated over from Minkyu Jung and Sunny Gho. Here's a look over at the cover from City Boy #1. Want to extend a big thank you over to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting this preview of the issue. I really like the sort of dejected pose that Cameron is striking over on the cover for City Boy #1. I think it really gives a fascinating glimpse over to his more sort of dejected personality. And I think you get a really good context behind it in the first couple pages of the issue as well. And I want to go ahead and show off some interior work over for the issue. I think this kind of first sequence in City Boy #1 is so emotionally powerful as readers get to see kind of the origin behind Cameron Kim and how he's kind of so much of a loner across all of these cities in the sort of DC universe here. I think artist Minkyu Jung does an excellent job depicting some of the really emotionally charged expressions from Cameron as a young boy very early in the issue. And I have to say here that there's some really fascinating synergy between Greg Pak and Minkyu Jung in this issue, because this is not the only time that Greg Pak uses Cameron as a very young child. And it seems like Greg Pak sort of builds off several plot threads in this issue to build towards a really epic nonlinear narrative. We will go ahead and touch a little bit about that in just a few moments here. But for now, I really want to focus in on just the incredible way that Minkyu Jung is able to kind of capture the expressions behind Greg Pak's script in the issue. It feels like there's all these extremely subtle moments where, Cameron Kim is kind of traversing throughout the city, and we really need an artist who's able to kind of depict the most subtle elements of the story in order for readers to really kind of get immersed in this story, featuring so many new characters across the DC universe. One great example of how Minkyu Jung really pays strong attention to detail is on this page that we have up on the screen. If you look behind the window of kind of like what looks to be a fancy restaurant, you can see that the kind of facial expression of the man sitting with the woman in the diner is actually depicted. And that is something that we see just directly through the window on the comic book page. So really impressed by the amount of detail that Minkyu Jung was able to depict over in the issue. There's some interesting page compositions, as you can see with this character kind of bleeding off the page in the lower right panel. And I do like the way that kind of when Cameron uses his powers to find these interesting objects, he's essentially able to do so by kind of looking through the schematics of the city. So I think that kind of visual representation from his artwork from Minkyu Jung is captured really, really well. Now, when it's time for the kind of adversaries in the issue, I think that Minkyu Jung does a great job kind of shifting the tone from a very sweet to kind of more sinister and dark. And I think that Greg Pak's script kind of starts, very solemn and turns a little bit more dour as the issue kind of goes on. So really happy to see that kind of Minkyu Jung and Greg Pak can definitely adapt and tell a story featuring kind of so many different emotions over on the page as well. Now, the aspect about this particular script that really had me excited was the fact that it sort of introduced a nonlinear narrative with so many plot threads interspersed throughout this kind of modern day story with Cameron Kim. There's also kind of the origins of the character dating back to those first couple pages, but that's not the only way that we get to interact with Cameron's origins, because we also see kind of the origins of how he gets his powers in the issue. So the aspect about this particular story that really impressed me was the fact that it was able to kind of weave in Cameron's current day plot thread and his plot thread involving him first kind of losing his parents, along with the plot thread with him first kind of gaining his powers. And the issue kind of uses these three stories interspersed kind of over and over and over again to hit such a strong emotional climax for the reader. And I was so impressed with the final page on the issue over from Greg Pak, because I felt like we already knew what the full scope of the story was. But I feel like with this cliffhanger that Pak introduced to the very last page of the issue, that the scope for this comic book is bigger than I could have ever possibly imagined. One of the things that I was really looking for that I didn't find any trace of in this particular issue was more follow-up on Cameron's Wildstorm origins. I would love to see kind of a return to Jack Hawksmoor like we got over in that Wildstorm 30th anniversary special. So I think out of sort of all the plot threads, that was the one that I didn't really see here. Also, I hope that in kind of some future issues of the series, along with characters like Jack Hawksmoor being introduced, I hope we get a return to Nightwing, because I think the kind of camaraderie over between Cameron Kim and Nightwing in Lazarus Planet Legends Reborn was such a sort of interesting plot thread over with this character that I don't think is sort of properly followed up on in this issue. But that being said, I think this issue accomplishes a lot. Readers are going to really get to know Cameron on a much kind of personal level. And I think this issue is sort of a great example of how powerful he is as a character. It's kind of staggering just how many abilities Cameron can have between kind of like phasing through certain environments, locating hidden items, and even kind of using his powers in a more offensive capacity when the situation calls for. So I just think this kind of story and the character of Cameron Kim is so versatile as well. One of the other things I really like about him is how he has this sort of like dejected personality, because I think it sort of gives him the chance to kind of have a character arc in the series. As you know, Cameron hopefully is going to turn into a full-fledged superhero, but he needs to get past the trauma inflicted on him from his origin story in order to sort of rise up to the occasion. So I love the fact that it looks like Greg Pak and Minkyu Jung have sort of a great, touchstone to kind of go off of and explore different plot threads from that. And again, I love how this book is kind of introduced firmly inside the DC universe as well, because I think it really allows for future plot threads to coalesce in a really fascinating way over from DC Comics. So, in terms of City Boy #1, I was really looking forward to this issue. I always like the sort of character design of City Boy Cameron Kim, but I was always hoping that the actual issue itself was going to live up to some of my rather large expectations for the story. But to be honest, I had a pretty good feeling about it because due to the fact that we've already gotten some City Boy material from this creative team, I expected greatness. And I really think that Minkyu Jung and Greg Pak delivered. I think they sort of went above my really high expectations for the issue by introducing the fascinating cliffhanger, creating so many details on the page. And I really think that the best part about City Boy #1 is the kind of structure of the issue. I've covered a lot of debut issues, and I think of all the ones I've covered, this one has a really special sense of pacing that starts really slow and builds up to kind of massive, booming plot lines. So those were some of my thoughts over on City Boy #1. I think this was a really fantastic debut issue over from DC Comics. Really excited to go ahead and round out the rest of the We Are Legends publishing initiative and to see what kind of future developments are going to come next over for this line in the future. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming to check out my review of City Boy #1. We'll be back with more excellent comic book reviews for all DC and Marvel comic books in the near future. Thank you so much for coming to check out our videos, and we'll be back really soon. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.